Racist doctor humiliates a pregnant black woman. 15 minutes later, her husband changes everything. Not all racism is loud. Some of the most painful moments happen in silence, under harsh fluorescent lights, and with cold, hollow smiles in places meant for healing. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Valerie Carter stepped into the waiting lounge of the Eastbrook Women's Medical Center, a luxury building nestled at the intersection of Juniper and Pontoleon in the heart of Atlanta. From the outside, it looked more like an upscale medical museum. Italian imported marble surfaces, sun-reflecting glass walls gleaming like mirrors, and perfectly regulated air conditioning held at a crisp 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Valerie, 32, a high school literature teacher at a public school on the city's west side, wore a turquoise maternity dress, the kind of lightweight fabric that embraced the full curve of a mother 6 months into her pregnancy. Her glowing brown skin, highlighted by the morning sun, radiated a gentle warmth, but also, unintentionally, became a target for glances filled with both scrutiny and subtle disdain from the reception desk. No greeting. No polite smile. She gently tightened her grip on the frayed canvas tote bag, resting her other hand on her belly to feel the soft, fluttering kicks of her unborn child. Her first. A journey hard won, 9 years of waiting, and 3 rounds of IVF treatment. For Valerie, every step was a victory. But walking through the door of this clinic, she wasn't just entering a medical appointment. She was stepping into a space where her very presence was seen as an exception. The waiting room was nearly silent, punctuated only by the clicks of high heels worn by other expectant mothers, all clad in Burberry coats, Dior handbags, and Apple watches. One white mother with softly curled blonde hair turned to her husband, whispered something while eyeing Valerie from head to toe, then subtly pulled her Hermes bag closer to her lap. Valerie didn't flinch. She was used to being rendered invisible in spaces like this, especially in environments considered exclusive. According to Eastbrook's internal data, of the 60 expectant mothers who came in for pregnancy scans the previous month, only 2 were women of color. The base consultation fee here was $500 per visit, not including advanced ultrasounds or blood tests, which brought the average appointment cost to nearly $1,200. But with a combined household income over $180,000 a year, Valerie wasn't here asking for a favor. She came as a paying client entitled to proper care. At the reception desk, a blonde woman around 24 or 25 typed at a speed that suggested she was racing a timer. Valerie approached, calm but firm. She knew exactly what to do, what to say. Every word rehearsed in advance, the way black women often must when entering spaces where they are judged by their skin before their name is even spoken. Good morning. My name is Valerie Carter. I have a 10:30 appointment with Dr. Matilda. The receptionist looked up, gave her a flat glance, no smile, no acknowledgement, just a quick, indifferent scan, one of those subtle, unmistakable cues that said, "You don't belong here." Valerie took the clipboard without another word. She sat down on a leather chair next to a pot of artificial orchids and began filling in each line with steady handwriting, though her hand trembled slightly. In her mind, a quiet mantra echoed, "It's okay. I'm here for my baby, and I deserve to be here." She didn't know that in just 15 minutes, prejudice would reach its cruelest peak. But also in those same 15 minutes, everything would change, and no one in that room, not even Valerie herself, would remain the same. Some wounds don't bleed. They seep quietly, coldly, and cut deep with things that seem harmless. A glance, a smile, or simply the way someone pronounces your name. After a few silent minutes of waiting, Valerie Carter stood up and walked toward the reception desk. The receptionist, a white woman about 25, her face carefully contoured with skin-toned foundation like wax, lips painted in trendy nude pink, looked up with a smile that felt more theatrical than welcoming. Not the kind that greeted you, but the kind that relished standing guard at the entrance to a world not meant for everyone. Valerie Carter, Valerie repeated, for the second time, her voice still composed, but now edged with firmness. The receptionist nodded, her eyes lingering a moment too long on Valerie's canvas tote, a worn beige bag with chipped paint on the lower corner, the kind that had accompanied her to school, grocery runs, and prenatal appointments at community clinics. In a world filled with Chanel and Louis Vuitton, that bag felt like a silent confession. "Please fill this out," the receptionist said, placing a clipboard with a questionnaire and a gleaming silver pen onto the glass counter, her tone flat and indifferent, like instructions at a checkpoint. Valerie took the clipboard. As she bent to sign her name, she could feel the receptionist's gaze still locked on her, waiting for a mistake, any small confirmation of the assumptions already made. Her fingers trembled slightly as she wrote, "Valerie L. Carter, 10:30 a.m., Dr. Matilda." Not from fatigue, not from pain, but from the suffocating sense of being dissected, like she wasn't a patient, but a foreign body in this sterilized environment. From behind, a white woman in a cream Gucci dress, seated 2 chairs away, abruptly pulled her clipboard closer, like she was guarding a treasure. A small gesture, but painfully familiar. Fear of contamination. Valerie didn't need to hear a word. Her expression said it all. A middle-aged man in a Ralph Lauren shirt, seated beside his wife, glanced at Valerie before quickly turning away, as if avoiding the social discomfort of a direct gaze. Even the classical music playing softly from the ceiling speakers, Debussy's Clair de Lune, sounded misplaced in that chilled, metallic air. Valerie bit her lip. Sweat began to bead along her spine, not from the temperature, but from the all-too-familiar feeling, as if she were swimming in a pool whose water was slowly being drained, slow, suffocating, and with no one reaching out a hand. In her mind, she whispered, "The registration fee is $500. I paid every cent. I booked this appointment 2 weeks ago, confirmed it again last night. So why does it feel like I'm begging?" It wasn't just invisible injustice, it was an accumulated injury. Valerie remembered her last visit to a public clinic, where a black doctor shook her hand with both of his, asked about her teaching job, and beamed when she described the first time she felt her baby kick. There, she was treated like a mother. Here, she felt like an intruder. After completing the form, she returned the clipboard. The receptionist said nothing, didn't even look up, just reached for it and resumed typing. "No, thank you for waiting. No, hope you have a good appointment." Just the invisible wall between 2 women, divided by skin, power, and prejudice, each standing on a different level, despite breathing the same air. Valerie returned to her seat, placed a hand on her belly. The baby stirred gently. She whispered, "Sweetheart, I'm here for you." "We're not weak. They just don't know what they're doing yet." Valerie Carter stood up after nearly 15 minutes of waiting, surrounded by classical music and the motionless gazes of the other women. The baby in her belly shifted gently. She placed a hand on it, exhaled slowly, then walked toward the hallway leading to the inpatient consultation wing. The glass doors opened by sensor, emitting a soft beep like the whisper of a gate that only welcomed those pre-selected. The hallway was clean to the point of feeling sterile. Cold white LED lights flooded the space, reflecting off the glossy ceramic tile floor like a mirror. Along both walls, large photo frames were evenly spaced, exactly 5 feet apart. Each one displayed a mother cradling a newborn, the infant still pink and wrinkled, eyes shut, tiny arms reaching out instinctively. All the mothers were porcelain white, blonde hair, rosy cheeks, diamond wedding rings sparkling. Some wore white lace dresses, Others were wrapped in pastel wool blankets. Each frame looked more like a fashion magazine spread than a medical clinic. Valerie slowed her pace. She looked at each photo, each face, each model-perfect smile, then at the small spaces between the frames. In those gaps, reflected faintly in the glass, was her image, a brown-skinned woman in a simple maternity dress, her canvas tote sagging off one shoulder from habit. Standing in a hallway built by and for model mothers, she felt like a ghost. Not rejected, but not acknowledged either. She recalled parent-teacher nights at the school where she taught. When she stepped up to the podium, many white parents would ask, "Are you the assistant?" Even though the name badge on her chest read, Valerie Carter, 8th grade English teacher, head of academic team. History lives in those small corners. Unspoken questions, assumptions that need no proof. The click of heels echoed from down the hall. A white woman in a theory dress, her hair curled in soft waves, walked past with her husband, a man in a crisp white shirt and glinting Rolex. They glanced at Valerie, then looked away quickly, as if to avoid colliding with something that didn't belong in this carefully curated space. Valerie imagined if there were a Mother of the Month poster hanging in this hallway, like the Employee of the Month plaques in office buildings, it certainly wouldn't be her. Even though she never missed an appointment, she maintained ideal blood pressure, blood sugar, and iron levels. Even though she read every book on motherhood, meticulously recorded every fetal movement, and whispered fairy tales to her baby each night from the womb. She did everything a model mother should. But it was never enough. It had never been enough when your skin becomes the first measure of worth. On a photo near examination room 3, a slogan was printed faintly below. "Happy mom, healthy baby. The journey begins together." Valerie gave a slight smile. The word "together" had never sounded more ironic. From the moment she stepped into this place, she'd been alone. Gavin, her husband, should have arrived by now, but he'd been called into an emergency investigation at the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. Valerie knew he'd come. She always believed that, because Gavin had never broken a promise. But his absence in this moment, standing here, surrounded by faces that looked nothing like hers, felt like a silent battle she had to carry alone. Valerie turned her head, inhaled deeply. She knew one thing. No one would rewrite the rules here for someone like her. But she could still move forward, because she wasn't only representing herself. She was walking for so many others, those whose photos would never be hung, whose names would never be spoken with respect. The door to exam room 3B swung open. A nurse stepped out, her eyes flicking briefly over Valerie. "Carter?" she said, her voice indifferent, like calling a queue number. Valerie stood tall, smoothed the hem of her dress, and stepped forward, as if entering a battlefield long established, where she was never expected, but would never bow. The door to examination room 3B closed silently behind Valerie, but with an uncanny weight. The room was designed to high-end standards: pale gray walls, a 4D ultrasound monitor mounted on a swivel arm, ivory leather chairs lining the wall, and a faint lavender scent blending with the sterile tang of medical disinfectant. Everything seemed according to protocol until the opposite door swung open. Dr. Matilda entered, a white woman in her early 40s, trim figure, wearing a spotless white lab coat and a charcoal gray silk scarf tied neatly at the collar. The kind of woman who likely spent 2 hours each morning choosing what to wear. Her hair was pinned into a tight bun, and her polished Oxford shoes clicked across the tiled floor with the authority of a verdict being delivered. Valerie stood reflexively, a polite smile brushing her lips in greeting. But Dr. Matilda neither extended her hand nor returned the smile. Instead, her eyes paused on Valerie's belly for less than a second, slid down to her soft leather flats, and finally settled on the faded canvas tote resting against the chair arm. She tilted her head slightly, the gesture eerily similar to someone inspecting a second-hand item. "Valerie Carter." Her voice rang with the resonance of a boardroom, but carried the chill of metal and shadow. It wasn't a question, nor a confirmation. It was a low thud. "So, you're the one." Valerie nodded, keeping her voice steady. "Yes, I have a 4D scan appointment today. I confirmed last night over the phone Dr. Matilda gave no acknowledgement. She didn't touch the ultrasound machine or reach for the medical chart. Instead, she turned toward her desk, methodically aligning a stack of medical forms, as if building an invisible wall between herself and her patient. Then, without looking up, she spoke. "Where's your husband?" That simple question, if spoken with care, might have touched the heart. But from Matilda's mouth, it sounded accusatory, ill-placed. An implication? "You came alone. Then who are you?" Valerie swallowed the dryness in her throat. "He's on his way. He got called into work this morning unexpectedly, but he should only be about 10 minutes late." Matilda's lip curled slightly. It wasn't a smile, more a twitch of disdain. "Ah," she replied curtly. "Of course." Of course. As if Valerie had just recited a tired script Matilda had heard 100 times before, from patients she didn't trust. Matilda turned, flipped open the digital chart already displayed on her tablet, her eyes scanning lines of data, until they paused at one line. Occupation: middle school English teacher. "You teach English?" she asked, curiosity tinged with frost. "Yes, 7th grade, at a public school in Midtown," Valerie replied, her tone softening. "Interesting," Matilda said, still focused on the screen. But her gaze didn't convey encouragement. It was the gaze of a home buyer, surveying a room smaller than advertised. Valerie understood immediately. From the outset, she was not someone to be trusted, let alone respected. Matilda moved toward the ultrasound station, pulling on a pair of gloves, but she didn't invite Valerie to the exam table. She paused again, her hand resting on the counter, and then, abruptly, she spoke. "We've had a few unfortunate cases. Some visitors come here just to create trouble, or worse, to exploit the system." Valerie blinked. "I don't understand. What do you mean?" Matilda didn't answer directly. "We have a responsibility to protect the safety of both our staff and clients. I hope you understand." The words were wrapped in the language of policy, but Valerie felt the message loud and clear. Matilda was questioning her very presence, her legitimacies in setting foot into Eastbrook Clinic, a place the Atlanta Med Review once described as reserved for the elite. She bit her lip and stayed composed. She'd been misjudged before, because of her skin, her car, the public school she taught at. But to be doubted here, in the place where she came to ensure her baby's health, in what was supposed to be one of the most sacred moments, was a blow harder than most. What Valerie didn't know was that this nightmare was only just beginning. And in a room deep in the clinic's basement, behind doors with no nameplates and aging security cameras, the truth was about to be twisted into a crime she never committed. The moment Valerie thought the examination might proceed normally, the next words from Dr. Matilda hit like a slap that didn't need to be raised. Her voice was crisp, deliberate, and each word was meticulously enunciated. "You know, only about 12% of women choose to attend prenatal appointments without informing who'll accompany them. Usually, there's a reason." It wasn't a question. Not a medical observation. It was a verbal bullet, wrapped in the clothing of statistics, aimed straight at her dignity. Valerie flinched, not because of what was said, but because of how effortlessly it was delivered. Cold, as though the doctor were announcing the room's air temperature. Matilda's eyes flicked briefly over Valerie's beige maxi dress, though made of high-end organic fabric and once featured in a spring issue of a motherhood magazine, it didn't meet the standards of respectability in the woman across from her. In Matilda's world, everything appeared to be encoded by brand, and Valerie wasn't wearing a Ralph Lauren nameplate. Valerie didn't react immediately. She pressed her lips together, slightly tilting her head to avoid the gaze scanning from her collar to her unpolished fingernails. It was a reflex she'd learned from years of teaching in front of parents who didn't believe in black educators. But this was different. This wasn't a classroom, and she no longer held the chalk. She was a patient, a mother, a body carrying life, and she was being treated like a problem. Matilda didn't stop. As though having chosen her morning role, she moved to the ultrasound screen, pressed a few buttons, then turned back. "So, you're paying in cash?" she asked, elongating the word cash like it was part of a riddle. "Or is it through some healthcare reform initiative? You know, there've been a lot of crowdfunding projects lately to revolutionize prenatal access." Valerie blinked. Every word was polite, but arranged to wound. And it worked. She felt like she'd just been branded a charity case. Her mind turned to Gavin, her husband, currently on his way. A strategic tech analyst at the Pentagon, the man who always told her, "We don't need to prove anything to anyone, as long as you believe in the truth." But how could she not feel the need to prove herself when the person across from her had already defined her by the dress on her back? Valerie drew a breath, holding her composure. "I'll be paying by card, as noted in the file from last week." Matilda nodded and said nothing else. She returned to the ultrasound setup, prepped the gel, and motioned for Valerie to lie down. "No, are you feeling all right? No? Has the baby been kicking?" Just a heavy silence, like a wall made of invisible bricks between two women, one in a white coat, the other carrying a life already dismissed at first glance. When the cold probe touched her belly, Valerie closed her eyes. The monitor showed the baby's form, heartbeat steady at 148 beats per minute, a strong signal. But no one in the room spoke. Matilda simply scribbled notes and issued clipped commands. "Inhale, exhale, don't move." Valerie told herself to be strong, but inside, something had fractured. She understood. Racism no longer needed to scream with hateful slurs. It arrived quietly, insidiously, through glances, tone, and unspoken assumptions, especially in healthcare, where humanity should be seen before skin tone or income level. And as Valerie lay there, she didn't yet know the road ahead would grow even darker, and only when the truth came to light would the system be forced to confront itself. As the ultrasound screen dimmed, Valerie had yet to sit up when Dr. Matilda's voice cut through the room, this time with no pretense, each word sharp and deliberate, like a blade slicing fabric. "My Cartier watch. I left it on the tray shelf, right beside the monitor. And now, it's gone." Valerie didn't understand what was happening. The lights were the same, the air conditioning still hummed, but the atmosphere thickened instantly. Within 15 seconds, the door flew open. Two security officers in charcoal uniforms stepped in. They asked no questions, gave no names. One, tall, broad-shouldered, muscles tight under his shirt, moved to block the exit. The other, a blonde woman with her hair tied back and a face void of expression, walked straight toward Valerie, scanning her from head to toe as if confronting a wanted fugitive. "Ms. Valerie Carter?" The female guard's voice rang out, stiff and mechanical like a line from a script. Valerie nodded, both hands still resting protectively on her belly. "You are currently a suspect in the disappearance of a high-value medical asset. We request that you remain in your position." "Missing what?" "I didn't take anything," Valerie stammered, heart pounding wildly. "I was just lying down for the ultrasound." Matilda stood with arms crossed, her gaze icy, as though she'd just exposed a con. "I didn't say you took it," she emphasized. "I only said, my Cartier watch, my wedding gift from my mother, has gone missing in this room, and only you and I were here." Valerie trembled. She hadn't touched anything except the ultrasound machine and a tissue. But logic meant nothing now. The guards weren't listening. One of them stepped forward, speaking swiftly into a radio. "Seal auxiliary exits. Initiate internal protocol. Client 4389. Special surveillance." From where she sat, Valerie could see her reflection shrinking in the steel surface of the exam table. Smaller, fainter, erased. She felt stripped of her role as a patient, reduced instead to a threat in a narrative already written. She tried to rise, but the female guard's hand came down like a strike. "Sit. This is not an appropriate time to move." "I'm pregnant," Valerie tried to say, but the words caught in her throat. Below her ribs, the baby shifted, reacting to the storm her body now endured. "We can inspect your bag," Matilda said, this time not as a request, but as an order. Or, "Shall we call the police?" Valerie sat frozen, her eyes wide, watching as three figures formed a quiet triangle around her: the doctor, the guards, and the weight of a system disguised as policy. No one asked if she needed an attorney. No one asked if she needed to lie down. No one asked if there were cameras in the ultrasound room, cameras that might prove her innocence. And that was the cruelest part, how the system pretended to be fair, while operating like a machine primed to distrust people of color, especially women, whether they held degrees, had bank accounts, or carried unborn children. Valerie pulled out her phone, her hands trembling. But before she could dial, the guard interrupted. "All devices must remain untouched. We'll hold it temporarily for investigative purposes." She didn't cry. She just fell silent, the way so many people of color have learned to, because tears would be seen as weakness, and resistance would be labeled aggression. Outside the exam room, a speaker calmly called for another patient. "Mrs. Jensen, your doctor's ready." Life at Eastbrook Women's Clinic moved on, as if falsely accusing a pregnant woman were just another item on the day's schedule. Valerie knew. This wasn't just a doctor's visit. This was a battle. And she, alone, was carrying both a life in her womb and a dignity under attack. The security room behind the administrative wing of Eastbrook Women's Clinic was completely cut off from the patient care area, as if designed for things no one was supposed to witness. The pale fluorescent lights above flickered faintly, exposing yellowed stains like remnants of neglect. The ash-gray walls resembled an interrogation chamber. There were no paintings, no symbols of medical care. Just two cold plastic chairs, a thin steel table, and a ceiling-mounted camera quietly recording without any stated purpose. Valerie Carter was instructed to sit in the chair facing the door, a placement perfect for making her feel like a criminal awaiting sentence. She wasn't handcuffed, but that didn't mean she was free. Her phone, the one item that could validate her integrity, or at least document what was happening, had already been confiscated under the guise of temporary safekeeping for investigation. "Administrative special oversight," the female guard said, her voice flat like reciting from a manual. "You're not under arrest, but for security reasons, you are not allowed to leave this area until the internal review is complete." Valerie didn't respond. She knew the law, at least enough to understand that here, the legal boundaries were stretched thin like fraying rope, liable to snap at any moment. They didn't need a warrant, didn't need paperwork, because they didn't call this detainment. But she couldn't leave. No lawyer, no official document, and above all, no one on her side. A young security guard, maybe not even 25, entered the room chewing gum. His white shirt was stained with blue ink. He glanced at Valerie and muttered, "Tired?" Then stay quiet and make it quick. No one's filming your TikTok here." The words cut through the air like a blade. Valerie raised her head and looked him squarely in the eyes. No screaming, no pleading, just a stare, cold as ice. But her silence was misread. They thought she was scared. They assumed she was used to powerlessness. Every detail in this room had a purpose. Dim lighting to strain the eyes, no clock to distort time, complete disconnection from the outside world. Phone, wallet, personal items, not for evidence, but for psychological control. Valerie began to feel her baby's heartbeat thumping harder inside her. She placed a hand over her dress and whispered, "Mom's here." Not to soothe the child, but to remind herself she couldn't break. Not now. She looked around. The ceiling camera, the door frame, the tiny glass panel that reflected her distorted silhouette. Valerie didn't want pity. She wanted justice. But more and more, the system made that feel like a distant dream. Because people don't need to touch you to hurt you. Sometimes, it's just the way they look at it, as a problem to be contained, that strips away your dignity. Outside, the clinic carried on as usual. White mothers continued signing their $500 forms, sent off with cheerful goodbyes, wishing mom and baby good health. But in this small room, a pregnant black woman was being held without charge, and the person who orchestrated the entire performance, Dr. Matilda, had yet to return and face her. Valerie clenched her fists and told herself, they can lock the door, but they can't lock away the truth. And in that very moment, the first flicker of resistance began to burn quietly, in silence. The metal door swung open with a sharp, deliberate sound, and in that fleeting moment, everything seemed to pause. Footsteps echoed slowly but firmly across the cold stone floor, reverberating through every corner of the security room. It wasn't just a man entering. It was an entire legal system walking in with him. Gavin Carter, in a crisp charcoal gray suit, navy tie, and the gleaming badge of the U.S. Department of Justice catching the dull fluorescent light, needed no introduction. His calm presence didn't shout, didn't threaten, but it shrank the entire room. His eyes scanned each person, stopping exactly where they needed to, long enough to make clear that the balance of power had just shifted. "I want to see my wife," Gavin said, his voice low and precise. It wasn't a request, and it wasn't a plea. It was a command, from a man who knew exactly what civil rights meant and how to burn down anyone who dared violate them. Valerie, sitting in the corner of the room, lifted her head. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't break. She didn't need to. The one she had waited for had arrived, not just a husband, but the living embodiment of a truth long suppressed. The young security guard, the one who had mocked her earlier, now stood upright, collar damp with sweat. A female coordinator stepped forward, her hand trembling, and asked, "Sir, would you like to see the incident report?" Gavin didn't answer immediately. He looked up at the ceiling camera, then pointed directly at it. "I want the full footage. If even 10 seconds is missing, I'll file a request to seize the entire server system for evidence tampering." The IT staff member stammered. We haven't had time to extract the file." "And the report? Grounds for detainment? On what basis was a pregnant citizen stripped of her freedom? Who approved it?" Gavin flipped open a small notebook, his tone as sharp as a scalpel. "And let me remind you, under Title 42, Section 1983 of the Federal Code, detaining a citizen without documentation or legal representation is a first-degree civil rights violation." A woman who appeared to be the clinic manager rushed in, breathless. "Mr. Carter, it seems there's been a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Gavin cut her off, his gaze slicing through her like a prosecutor in court. Who is she to you? A name? A skin tone? A canvas bag? Or just a convenient scapegoat when someone's watch goes missing? Valerie Carter is a university lecturer, 6 months pregnant, with no criminal record, and more importantly, a citizen of a nation that I thought still had a constitution. The room fell into utter silence. Valerie stood and slowly walked toward Gavin. He took her hand, said nothing. But that single gesture stitched back together the dignity that had just been trampled. "We're leaving," he said. And as they stepped out of the room, Gavin paused briefly, turned toward the camera, and spoke just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Don't think I'll forget this. Starting tomorrow morning, I'm filing a formal request with the Department of Justice to launch a statewide investigation into racial discrimination and abuse of authority in private healthcare facilities." His words rang out like thunder in the quiet storm of hidden wrongs. Valerie and Gavin left the clinic in silence, but every step they took knocked louder on the doors of justice. And in that moment, prejudice met its reckoning. Not in a white coat, but in a badge that bore the weight of true justice. The data center of Eastbrook Women's Clinic sat tucked behind a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." But Gavin Carter didn't need to knock. He simply held out his DOJ badge and looked directly at the IT technician, a man in his 30s wearing a clinic-logoed polo shirt, face pale as if he'd just seen a federal warrant. "Replay the hallway camera, exam room 3, from 10:38 to 10:52, Gavin said crisply. No one dared object. Within 60 seconds, the footage appeared on the wide screen. Every detail unraveled with the precision of a high-tech courtroom. Valerie entered the room carrying a beige canvas bag. She didn't touch anything on the shelf. She walked directly to the examination table and sat down as instructed by the nurse. The timestamp was clear: 10:42:7. On screen, the Cartier watch, a stainless steel Tank Française valued at nearly $8,200, remained exactly where it had been placed, beside a bottle of sanitizer. At 10:44, a cleaning staff member entered, placing a tray of instruments on the same shelf. The watch remained undisturbed. Gavin paused the video at exactly 10:47:31, before Valerie was accused of leaving the room. He looked around slowly and asked, "Did anyone see her take the watch?" No one answered. The camera operator swallowed hard. "And yet you decided to confiscate her phone?" Gavin continued, each word honed like steel. "Confiscated it without documentation, detained her without a formal charge, cut off her communication without legal clearance. Are you aware that violates the 4th and 14th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution?" The clinic manager, a blonde woman named Hannah, tried to keep calm, but sweat streaked down her temple. "We were just following internal security protocol." "Internal protocols never override federal law," Gavin cut her off. "This is a clinic, not a detention facility. You have no legal authority to coerce or investigate a citizen without a warrant." He turned to Valerie, who had now been brought to the waiting area under nurse supervision. Her face was still pale, but her eyes had regained their steadiness. Gavin nodded to his wife, then turned back to the screen. "I'll be extracting the entire CLI for DOJ records as evidence. I'll also be requesting a full audit of all grievance handling procedures at this facility for the past 3 years." No one said a word, but the entire room felt as if it had been stripped bare. Just the clip of Valerie being escorted, exactly 2 minutes and 13 seconds, later uploaded by an anonymous nurse, garnered over 1.2 million views within 3 hours. The moment Valerie was ordered to surrender her phone without clear evidence became the focal point. Comments poured in. Why does her skin color automatically make her the suspect? If there weren't cameras, she might have been jailed. Renowned civil rights attorney Julia Fern swiftly tweeted, "Valerie's greatest offense was walking into a so-called healthcare space wearing the wrong color skin." Shame on this system. Simultaneously, a civil rights group in Los Angeles launched the Protect Black Mothers campaign, demanding investigations into 25 private clinics statewide for racial bias and unlawful practices. Gavin didn't need to say anything more. Cameras don't lie, and this time, justice didn't need a white coat. It wore a suit, held a DOJ badge, and stood beside the woman he loved, to restore the truth, frame by frame, in 700-pixel clarity beneath a burning afternoon sun. 3 days after the incident, Eastbrook Women's Clinic held an unprecedented internal meeting. In the large conference room, previously reserved for discussions about premium service marketing and facility upgrades, the phrase "systemic racial bias" appeared in bold on the opening slide for the first time. Gavin Carter didn't sit at the end of the table. He sat at the center, alongside a representative from the Department of Health and 2 observers from the Federal Civil Rights Agency. In front of him lay documents, meeting minutes, case files, and a sealed copy of the surveillance footage. Valerie stood up to speak. She didn't read from a paper, nor glance at the projector screen. One hand rested on her belly, the other kept her spine straight. Her voice was calm, resonant, and unwavering. I am not an exception. I represent hundreds of thousands of women of color who walk into spaces labeled safe each year, only to be met with suspicion, surveillance, and humiliation. I carry a child, a life not yet born, and the very first thing this system has taught them is silence. The room grew thick with silence. Those who had managed the clinic for nearly 2 decades, long accustomed to assessing patients by their handbags and perfume, were now forced to sit and listen to a truth they had long ignored. 2 days later, Matilda was officially suspended indefinitely, not only for discrimination, but also for filing false reports and violating personal rights. The clinic's board of directors issued sweeping reform policies. Every employee was mandated to complete 50 hours of training on identifying and dismantling racial bias in healthcare within 6 months. Security footage would now be stored for a minimum of 72 hours, and data must be extracted within 24 hours if related to civil rights issues. All receptionists, security personnel, and doctors would undergo nonviolent psychological response assessments twice per year. The clinic's code of ethics was reprinted with a new clause. Any statement or action that causes psychological harm related to race, gender, religion, or identity is a violation of policy, subject to immediate termination. 3 weeks later, Valerie appeared at a community forum hosted by the Department of Health. She wore a simple white dress, black flats, her hair neatly tied up, her gaze composed. In her hand was a copy of that morning's New York Times, the headline reading, "Black, Pregnant, and Still Forced to Prove Innocence." Standing at the microphone, she began, "I'm not here to receive an apology. I'm here to demand change. And I will not leave until we accept one truth, that human beings should never be categorized by skin color, but by how we are respected, heard, and protected." The entire room erupted in applause. Some stood. There were quiet tears. A young woman in the 3rd row, also pregnant, raised a hand to her mouth, as if trying to hold on to the hope just ignited. At the end of the video posted from that event, Valerie is seen stepping down, gently placing her hand on her belly, as if whispering to the child, yet unborn, that this world may not be just yet, but there will be those who rise. The words appeared. The story didn't end in that clinic. It continues at every threshold, every doctor's visit, and in every decision, no matter how small, to speak up. Off-screen, somewhere, someone was typing her name again, Valerie Carter, not as a victim, but as a trailblazer. At last, something had begun to change. Join us in sharing stories that matter by liking and subscribing. And don't forget to turn on notifications, so every morning starts with truth, compassion, and the lessons that bring us closer.